What's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's episode of the Well Man's Podcast. My name is Brian Brosey. I'm joined by my friend and co-host Keoni Tita. Keoni, how are you today?
Doing good, and now I'm stressed about my hearing because of this podcast. But anyway, this podcast is going to be on hearing loss for the
I'm
most
excited
part.
for it. I listen to a lot of loud rap music, so this is going to be very good for me.
Yeah, so you got to really be careful with that. I mean, it's really interesting. Like people who, have these earplugs, these earphones on and everything, and listen to Audible or listen to a lot of loud music. Yeah, you definitely can mess up your hearing, and in fact, you probably are. So,
Well, it's going to be interesting to see, in my opinion, too, how this shapes out generationally. Because I would say, like my generation, I would say is like the first generation grow up with constant headphones. Like we went from,
right.
the big tin can to all the way to, the little pod that goes directly into your ear, which I can only imagine is worse.
Yeah.
And I mean, my whole childhood, I had headphones in.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, let me tell you a story about myself too. Like my first, uh, well, let's put it this way. So you brought up the earphones, right? Or listen to loud music, but also speaking of that, concerts, right? So my first experience with hearing damage and pretty much permanent hearing damage was I went to a concert back in 1991. It was actually Guns N' Roses. It was so loud that I had tinnitus ringing in the ears for weeks afterwards. That would
Weeks.
not,
Oof.
yeah, that would not stop. And so that was basically indicative of some hearing loss, which was probably permanent. And then way back before then, my first rock concert that I went to was out in LA. I think in '86. It was who was it? Oh, Ozzy Osbourne out in LA,
All
Long
right.
Beach. Yeah. So I went there, and same thing, So ever since that concert that I went to, those two concerts, but especially the Guns N' Roses concert which I saw in Charlotte, I carry a set of earplugs with me everywhere I go. And especially if I'm going to listen to music, I wear them no matter what, or if I'm exposed to loud sounds. And so people will say like, okay, well, all right, well, that's good enough. But really, how do you define a loud sound, right?
Mm-hmm.
And with sounds, it's all based in decibels. And the higher the decibels, the louder the sound. And so to get an idea of what that is, right? We know with long-term exposure to 85 decibels or more that you're damaging your hearing, and probably permanently. So what is 85 decibels? That's like heavy traffic. That's like you can think about like a loud window air conditioning unit, a very noisy restaurant, a loud
Blender,
lawnmower,
I know is.
a blender. Now, again, I don't want to stress people out here, right, where they need to be wearing earplugs all the time. It's also the dosage of that sound,
Mm-hmm.
right? So
Mm-hmm.
if you're exposed to it briefly, it's probably not going to do anything. But speaking of that, like that's pretty, we all know these sounds, and some occupations are exposed to those for hours at a day. You think about a chainsaw,
Yeah.
if you're cutting wood, or I don't know, maybe a construction worker or something like that, or working in a noisy factory. I mean, this, you really need to wear your hearing, something that blocks the sound, or at least reduces the decibel level somehow.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So once you get above 85 decibels, what are you talking about here? Well, you're talking about like probably around 100. You're talking about a loud motorcycle, ATV, about 110, talking about chainsaw, leaf blower, 120 decibels. You're talking about an airplane, being close to an airplane, rock concert, loud symphony, sports crowd. So think about all these things where you can wear protective ear stuff, and you really do want to do it, because there is this whole thing where the older you get, you can't stop age-related hearing loss, or at least not yet, right? So you are going to have some hearing loss as you age. You're definitely going to accelerate it if you don't protect your ears from just every normal, everyday, like noise pollution. People who live in urban areas, like I tend to, they will have more hearing loss than people who tend to live in rural areas and aren't exposed to loud noises. So anyway, that gives you an idea. If you want to just see like what the average decibel levels are of different sounds, that's easy to look up online. You can just Google that.
Yeah, now our phones, I know the Apple Watch will give you like an alert for your, the sound around you and whatnot.
That's
And that's a
great.
really
Yeah.
good way of measuring it and just kind of letting you know. Like I'll be at a Auburn football game and the watch was buzzing off, let me know it's 110. If you're here for too long, it's going to cause temporary hearing loss.
Yeah,
So
that's
all that kind
great.
of stuff's really helpful. So
Yeah,
there's
it's
probably a way to register it on your phone if you're just curious about a specific instance.
right, right. I think the key number is like 85 decibels, prolonged loud noise, like 8 hours or so. You can get hearing damage. So where whatever that may be, and the 85 decibels. Think about heavy traffic, loud, loud traffic, noisy restaurant. That's where you are about 85 decibels. I think a good rule of thumb is whenever you're talking to somebody and you feel like you have to talk louder, to get them to hear, so
Okay,
that's a good kind of sense of where 85 decibels would be. So you talk about, so maybe certain apps or your phone can alert you, which is great. That's really cool because I haven't been using that, and I'll start using that. But if you wanna, you can also test your hearing with apps on the phone, and go to a YouTube video, just say test hearing loss, type that in, and you can see if you have any type of hearing loss. And as we get older, we tend to lose hearing in the high frequency ranges. And hearing is usually from, like, when we talk about frequencies, we're talking about like 20 hertz all the way up to 20,000 hertz. And that's like the human range. And you can get an idea of where you are and what kind of hearing loss you have, based on where you stop hearing, the frequencies as the frequencies get higher and higher.
Okay.
So you can go to YouTube and just, it takes like 5 minutes. You just listen to a sound and the frequency as it goes up, and then it will tell you where your hearing loss is or how good your hearing may be.
That was always a stressful test as a kid when they put the headphones on you and you had to raise your hand when you heard the buzzer.
Right. Yeah.
You really didn't want to miss out.
Right. So that's like not such great news, right? Because, okay, so Keoni and Brian are telling us, yeah, you're going to lose your hearing as you get older. Yeah, that's true. That is true. It's kind of like, parts wear out, right? It's like an old car. Like as you get older, parts tend to wear out at least. So, what can you do? You could actually slow that down. And in some cases, you may be able to reverse some of the damage too, because after all, your body, it runs on ATP. Mitochondria, supporting your mitochondrial function is a big deal for maintaining hearing. We talked about this in some of our eye podcasts. So there are some things that you can do to help that. Before we jump in, let me just talk to people about like the anatomy of the ear, so people get an idea. It's kind of fascinating. Like most of us all see what the external ear looks like, and it's in medical terms called the pinna or the auricle. And when I say auricle, I'm not talking about the auricle ORACLE. I'm talking about auricle AURICLE is the auricle of the ear. It's the outer ear, and that functions to just basically kind of concentrate sound. So all that weird structure, the outer ear, if you really look at it, it's a fascinating structure. We studied it a ton, doing ear acupuncture. So we had to know all the points in the ear and the structure of that outer ear. But that outer ear is just fascinating because the way it is set up, it's just, from an evolutionary perspective, all those little, curves and ridges and dents and all that on the outer ear, what it does is just concentrate sound so that it can then focus it into the external, auditory medius or the ear canal, which goes all the way to your eardrum.
Yeah, it's or like a reverse megaphone.
Yeah, right. So concentrated sound goes to the eardrum. What does the eardrum do? Well, it's now a mechanical way to amplify sound even more. So it hits the tympanic membrane, the eardrum, and then it amplifies sound even more with what we call the ossicles, and that's the malleus, incus, and stapes. Okay, these are the little ear bones, and they're the smallest bones in your body, and there are 3 bones, and the the malleus is attached to your eardrum, and the incus is the middle bone, and the stapes is now attached to what's called the cochlea. And the cochlea is a fluid-filled, snail-like looking structure that has little hair follicles all over it. And as sound travels to the eardrum, ultimately to the stapes hits against that cochlea. And since it's fluid filled, again, the fluid helps amplify sound, and then it affects those little hair follicles all over the cochlea, and that turns it into an electric signal that then goes through the cochlear nerve to your brain, and therefore now you perceive sound. So it's a fascinating thing. So one thing I will say, people have noticed this, is, so you have between the eardrum and the cochlea, that's called the middle ear, and you have an eustachian tube there. And a lot of people, like when they get sick, they will feel like they can't hear as well. And a lot of times fluid will fill into that middle ear, and it kind of dampens the sound and doesn't let the eardrum and those bones do its thing on the cochlea. And it's a lot of people's sinus problems will get like clogged ears, and that's one of the issues there. And so there's ways that I treat, like, temporary hearing loss with allergies or sickness by helping to drain that eustachian tube, which connects to the middle ear and drains into your throat. But in a nutshell, that's basically the anatomy of the ear. So where does the damage actually occur with hearing loss? Well, most of the damage actually occurs in the cochlea, right, where those hair follicles are. And those hair follicles are basically burned through ATP, lots of mitochondria there to keep things healthy there. And as hair follicles die off, you lose hearing. And most of the time, as we get older, we lose the high frequency range. So loud noises. So really, really loud noises, even if they're sudden, like a gunshot, if it's close to your ear, can cause permanent hearing loss. That's it. Like, if it's close to your ear. So if you're shooting guns, you need to wear ear protection. I mean, it's too close to your ears, and it will hearing. So a lot of gun owners who like going shooting have significant ear hearing loss. And then, of course, a lot of rock stars or people who love going to concerts do too. And it's those hair cells in the cochlea that are damaged or die off.
Okay.
Yeah. So with that being said, let's just go through just some facts here. Right now, since we've talked about decibels, the frequency, just how important the ear is. Right now, I think it's estimated that about 10 million adults experience noise-induced hearing loss, American adults, and then one in 40 million, I think, what is it? Chronic tinnitus. So up to 40 million adults, chronic tinnitus or ringing in the ears also have that. I'm sure you've ran into patients, right, who have constant ringing in their ears. Yeah, I do too, because there's not really a great treatment for it. Actually, the only really good treatment for it is acupuncture and Chinese herbs. Sometimes you can get some good results with that, with people who have it chronically going on. And you can imagine, if you chronically have ringing in your ears, then this can be very stressful, right? And then that can lead to all kinds of things. So you're talking about sleep issues, possibly high blood pressure, elevated heart rate, psychological, physiological stress that causes increase in cortisol. And, that can be, that can lead to morbidity and mortality also, just tinnitus alone. So it's not one of these benign things that, that happens to people. But if you do have chronic tinnitus or ringing in the ears, yeah, that's indicative of some hearing damage. So it's, even more so, if you're dealing with that, you want to protect your ears. So
I imagine that ringing in the ears is something a little different than kind of the hairs being damaged. Is that correct?
Well, so what's happening there is those hairs are constantly being stimulated, right? They don't know when to shut off the sound perception or the stimulation. They don't know when to shut off the electrical signal to the brain, and that's where it's happening. The ring in the ear is happening at those hair follicles. But yeah, you're right. I mean, that's where you're hearing that ringing for the most part.
That's
And so,
interesting because I didn't know. I'm definitely no expert, but I thought it was
well,
more of
I'm
those.
not either. This is just stuff that, I've kind of read. And I'm probably not explaining it great, but usually it's the hair follicles are the source of the tinnitus. Like they're being overstimulated.
Mhm.
And it has a lot to do with like mitochondrial integrity or excitatory neurochemicals like glutamate, like not being dissipated enough so that the hair follicles are constantly being stimulated. And if they're constantly being stimulated, you can think about the hair follicles as almost burning out.
Hmm.
So anyway, we know, noise-induced hearing loss affects millions of Americans, and we've run into people with tinnitus. We know plenty of people with that have hearing aids. Lots of musicians, have this, or don't are not using appropriate protection for their ears and things like that, and they really should. But tinnitus is a consequence of damaging noise that damages your hearing. So most of the time it goes away, which is great. For me, it lasted like 2 weeks and probably caused some permanent damage for me. And you just want to be careful. You just want to be careful. I think all of us have experienced that with a loud noise. Have you
Yeah, for
experienced
sure.
that where you get the ringing? It's usually brief, but then it will go away.
Oh yeah, like I was
Yeah.
saying, after some of those big college football games,
Yeah.
and then yeah,
Yeah. So if you love college football, right? If you're going to some of those big games, that's an ideal place to wear
Mhm.
hearing protection. And so what about hearing protection? You want to make sure you have protection that is comfortable. For one, I've had some of the hearing protectors, like those earplugs, that just hurt. And so you got to
Yeah,
find some. And a lot of these are rated too. A lot of these earplugs are rated in a certain way that will dampen the noise more so than others. So you want to look at that too, and really get an idea of what kind of noisy environment you're going into and what kind of earplug. But really, the most important thing to think about with that is what's going to be comfortable for you.
hmm
And if it's going to be uncomfortable, you're going to constantly want them in or out or whatever, and you don't want to do that.
yeah. The technology is really helping with that. Just not to harp on this Apple train, but the Apple AirPods have like a noise cancellation feature, which is it's a very unique situation to put them in. Then all of a sudden you can't hear your air conditioning or any ambient sound. And it's just complete silence. So things
Right.
like that are super comfortable that you could take and just easily pop in at the game.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I'll start using some of that. I mean, it's really important the older you get. So to really take that into account, and especially the occupational hazards
Hmm.
of noise. And we don't really think about that so much, right? I mean, even with urban living, we don't think about noise pollution. We think about like, you know, smoke pollution, particulate pollution, but we don't really think about too much about noise pollution, and it's a real thing.
Right.
Um, so what are the risk factors? Well, of course, we've been talking about age. So age is probably one of the biggest risk factors. Anytime you have compromised blood flow to any part of your body, you're going to have problems with hearing, eyesight, any type of compromised blood flow. And what does that really entail? That entails cardiovascular disease or heart disease, high blood pressure, diabetes compromises blood flow. There are some supplements and drugs that help improve blood flows, which can help with hearing. You're doing the same thing if you smoke, right? You're going to affect your cardiovascular system in a way that's going to negatively affect blood flow to small structures like your eyes and your ears. So you really want to be careful with that, and staying in good health is a big thing. Smoke is a big deal. Exposure to loud noise, of course. There's some people who just genetically may have like a condition that just messes with the ear canal itself, or maybe there's a condition called otosclerosis, which is just abnormal bone growth in the middle ear, which will affect hearing. One very common thing people don't really think about a lot is the ototoxic drugs, so drugs that cause hearing loss, and these can be some common drugs, right? Even high doses of aspirin can damage your hearing. So antibiotics, chemotherapeutic drugs can do it. conventional treatments for hearing loss. Well, the big ones are like hearing aids for chronic tinnitus, the ring in the ears, retraining therapy, trying to use different therapies that allow your brain to cancel out the noise. The noise is there, but it's, ways to help your brain ignore it is a form of treatment. Certain masking devices, things that, like noise cancellation type things will help with that. There are called cochlear implants that can help. And then there's also implantable bone conduction hearing devices that can help. But most of the time we see the hearing aids, they're getting better and better and smaller, that just kind of fit on the outside of your ear, and you don't even really notice them. I remember when they were really kind of big. For my grandparents had them, and they were definitely noticeable, but now you don't even really notice them so much.
Yeah.
With hearing loss, I think, it's the higher frequency sounds that are worse. So a lot of older people will complain about, they can't hear the birds chirping as well anymore. That may be a thing. They can't hear consonants, right? So they any type like SH or F, they don't hear them when
those
they're
a lot.
Huh? Yeah,
S,
well,
H,
yeah.
and F. I tend to use those frequently.
Just think about with words that have those consonants in them.
Sure.
Like a lot of times people. Yeah, yeah. Did you mean shit? Hit? What did you mean there? So yes. So if you're not hearing that, it can be really stressful for people, right? I mean, like you've been in situations where you're trying to understand something, or maybe loud, and you're not really getting the gist of it, and that can be a little stressful.
That's what I was going to say. That's the first thing I'm noticing at my age right now is, in a busy restaurant, the person sitting, catty corner to me or opposite end of the table, I am just going to be yesing them to death because I can't understand a word that they're saying, because it all just blends together. Whereas before I used to be able to like tune into this and tune into that. And right now it's just like, yeah, I can hear it all, but nothing.
Yeah, no, I've been there. I've been there before. And it can be stressful. And you just think about people who have profound hearing loss, how that just can ruin their social life, right?
Yeah.
And we haven't done a specific podcast on it, but we talked about it. Like one of the biggest indicators of morbidity and mortality is just loneliness. And this is something that can, nurture that loneliness, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Just some interesting things before we get into like the natural therapeutics. I love like some of these hearing facts that maybe a lot of people don't know. A lot of people think like when you sleep, you're not actually hearing. Well, no, it's actually your brain canceling out the noise. You actually hear, you perceive sound while you are sleeping. It makes me think, gosh, I wish I could have like put my headphones in and listened to my lectures while I was in college and gotten it all, but unfortunately the brain cancels it all out. But your brain is perceiving it, just not, Yeah,
you think of like a loud thunderstorm waking you up. You definitely hear it.
Yeah. You can, you definitely wake up. And then most of us know like the animals that hear the best. The number one animal that has the best hearing out of all animals are moths. And then after that, you have bats with their echolocation. Owls are really good. Elephants with their big ears are incredible hearers. They can hear just about anything. I would hope so. Yeah. Yeah. And then this is fascinating to me. And my wife always tells me, when I come home, my dog seems to know that I'm coming down the streets before anybody, it just seems to know. And then also, so the dogs are really good at hearing. They can perceive things, and they can really discreetly hear things. So they tend to know like the owner's footsteps and everything. So they can hear a lot. And cats are really good hearers too. But moths are the king of hearing. So
I did not know that. That is pretty interesting. And it's interesting to, what is it, first 2 or 3 fly.
What's that?
The first 2 or 3 are flying animals.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yes. Right. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. So, which is fascinating too, because it makes you think, right? Like, sound travels through air, right? I would think also that, well, maybe not. I guess not. I mean, because when you're in an underwater environment, sound is really amplified, right? So yeah, maybe I was thinking whales, but maybe not. But yeah, I think
it is. I guess
people
so.
in a more, as a not in a watery environment, but
How does that make
animals.
sense? That
Yeah,
it's more because it is like you can be in a pool and you hear all like the cracks and things really amplified,
yeah,
but it's
yeah,
traveling through a much more solidified way of getting to your ear canal.
yeah. Well, just the air pressure, the sound pressure of the water and the molecules being closer together, I guess it makes it
Okay.
travel quicker. That's hey,
Okay.
I need to get my friend on here or some chemist on here to tell us exactly how that goes.
Might
But
as well
yeah,
change the podcast to Speculation Saturday.
right, yeah. But so anyway, those are just some interesting facts on that. Um, there's some emerging therapies for hearing loss and tinnitus.
Yeah,
You
so I
know,
know how to
out
prevent it. Now that I know, I go to, a dinner with a bunch of friends and I can't hear the person on the end of the table.
right.
What types of things can I do other than preventative, all the things that we discussed, when I do go to the football game, wearing headphones or ear protection and so on and so forth.
Right, right. Yes. Well, one of the things that I recommend, okay, and we recommended this on the last few episodes when we were talking about eyesight, is people really should get screened for their hearing once every few years, once a year, like go to an audiologist or, talk to the primary care physician or you just do it online with some of the YouTube videos to see where your hearing is. And you may want to see a specialist about it. So I think testing your hearing periodically is a good way to stay on top of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
In addition to the protection and all that. So that's one thing. There are, other things that you can use. We talked about the hearing aids, but there's also some other things like, there's something called neuromodulation. This is a process to correct the misfiring or the continuous firing of neurons in the brain leading to tinnitus, right? So we talked about those hair follicles constantly being stimulated. So there's things like TMS or transcranial magnetic stimulation, deep brain stimulation, acoustic stimulation. These are neuromodulatory therapies. There are certain medications that may help people with like the ringing in the ears, like tinnitus. However, there's more study that needs to be done on that. I think the best thing to do for it, besides making sure you have a baseline hearing and test it periodic and see where you are, just like you would for your eyes, and you definitely should do that for your eyes and ears, is making sure that you are maintaining your health, sleep, exercise. Exercise is one of the best ways to increase blood flow throughout the body. It's one of the best ways. There's evidence that shows that people who exercise can stave off hearing loss, age-related hearing loss. They do it much better because they're constantly like improving their blood flow and keeping the pipes clean, so to speak, and improving nitric oxide, improving mitochondrial function. That's probably one of the most important things. And then after that, it's the lifestyle stuff we always talk about, Brian. It's like, sleep, proper diet, that type of thing. But there are actually some neat things that you can do for hearing. And I know you're not going to believe this, Brian, but one of my favorite minerals that will help hearing is magnesium. Right? Talk about it. We talk about it every episode, but it is true, and it's one of my favorite things. But they just think about magnesium in general supporting ATP, and there's some pretty neat research on it helping stave off hearing loss and may even help improve hearing. So that's like my first one, of course. It also, it improves circulation. It does a lot of other things. We also know that people who are deficient in magnesium tend to be more at risk for noise-induced hearing loss. So just supplementing seems to be a good thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is NAC. We did a glutathione podcast. We talked about N-acetylcysteine, NAC. It's a naturally occurring antioxidant, increases the production of glutathione. Anytime you do that, you're keeping down free radicals, oxidative stress. And again, it's been shown in both humans and animals to protect against hearing loss from loud noises. Acetyl-L-carnitine, It seems to help protect against mitochondrial damage, and you get mitochondrial damage, hence the hair follicle damage with loud noises or prolonged constant loud noises. And it just seems to protect that cochlea. And the other thing it also does, which is really interesting, NAC does this too. It can prevent drug-induced ototoxicity. Okay, so both of those can do that. We also know that elevated homocysteine levels, we talked about that on a podcast. We talked about like the anti-aging tests that we like. They were homocysteine, hemoglobin A1C, vitamin D, fasting insulin, HSCRP, but homocysteine is one of them. Anyway, elevated homocysteine levels are associated with B vitamin insufficiency. And whenever you have insufficiency, that's linked to increased risk of hearing problems. Specifically, the vitamins we're talking about mostly are folate and B12. So folate and B12. So a good multivitamin. Yeah. And the reason why I say a good multivitamin, what usually comes with a good multivitamin, vitamins A, C, and E, these are also supplements that help quell free radicals. We have studies on them also protecting against noise-induced hearing loss in mostly animal studies. But again, a good multivitamin is a great thing to do.
Yeah,
melatonin.
So far the multivitamin would cover
most of everything. Yes, yeah. It's a good thing to do. Melatonin, I call it the brain antioxidant. It's actually produced in your brain. Low levels of melatonin are associated with high frequency hearing loss. And this is what you see as you get older, mostly in elderly subjects. It has protective effects, and it has actually been shown to improve tinnitus in some clinical studies. So that's really cool. And then CoQ10 is an antioxidant that is known to just support mitochondrial function. The other thing it does is actually been shown to help lower blood pressure, which indirectly can help with hearing loss. And it may also alleviate tinnitus. Just a medical term for people. You heard of presbyopia, right? I don't know if we talked about this last podcast. Presbyopia is age-related eyesight loss. I'm feeling it now. I'm starting to have to, things close up I can't focus on. And that's a normal thing of age. And usually happens around age 35, and then it gets worse and then it levels off. Well, there's age-related hearing loss. It's called presbycusis, not presbyopia, presbycusis. So Presbycusis, presbycusis. Age-related. Take
that to the family Scrabble game over Christmas.
Yes, that's a word that you're going to win on. That's for sure. Age-related hearing loss. That's what that is. So another supplement that's really kind of up and coming for a number of things, but it's new to me for hearing loss is taurine, and it seems to, at least in studies, reverse certain biochemical processes behind the mechanism of hearing loss. So, and it also may reduce the ringing sounds of tinnitus. Now, when we're talking about ringing in the ears, tinnitus, one of the ways I treat it, I tend to use magnesium and an herb called ginkgo biloba. We actually talked about that a little bit on our ginkgo podcast. So that may help. Ginkgo seems to improve blood flow to the ear area. And then, of course, the other mineral that seems to be really helpful for a number of things is zinc, and then the fatty acids, like the omega-3 fatty acids. All of those have some benefit to help prevent hearing loss and may reverse some hearing loss from what we're seeing in the studies. So that's pretty good news, Yeah. Because it's like that old adage, once you lose it, you lost it for good. That doesn't necessarily seem to be true for hearing loss, where it seems to be more true for age-related eyesight issues.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. So,
I'd be interested to learn more about like self-care for the hairs too. After they're damaged, is there anything that can be done? Or yeah,
and it's usually what they're finding, what indicates that there may be self-care for that, besides the protective stuff, is maintaining your health, overall body health, constitutional health, and then also possibly supplementing with some of those things that we talked about, and at the very least taking a good multivitamin on somewhat of a regular basis can really help.
Yeah.
So, anything else we should talk about?
Yeah, when Keoni, one time I think it was the
Uh-huh.
last time I was up in Winston with you.
Yeah.
Me, you, and Jillian went to eat. We were eating outside. Fire truck drives by. It's blaring the alarms. Both you and Julian cover your ears, and I just stand there like an idiot with my ears bleeding. And that's when I realized I better do a little bit more self-care. And there's no reason to have any pride about this. And since that moment, I've been covering my ears when the ambulance or fire truck passes by. So thank you so much.
I think that's a good idea. So yeah, so we're eating outside, right? And we're eating right along the street. A lot of times, like when we eat outdoors along the main street, and yeah, if a siren, police siren is coming by, yeah, that loud noise can damage your ear. That's absolutely true. Especially the closer it gets to you, right?
Right.
Now, the nice thing about it is it's not going to be blaring right in your ear for a long period of time. But yeah, it's probably a good idea to cover your ears.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I learned the hard way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Until looking around the table, like, what am I doing?
Yeah. I trust me, I have two on a number of things. Well, so basically with this podcast, I recommend if you guys want to get a baseline for your hearing, you can go to YouTube. You can use some apps on your phone, but there's just type in hearing test on YouTube. There's one called Cool Hearing Test. Are you superhuman? You can takes like 5 minutes to listen to, and there's another hearing test. Both of those will test your hearing frequency. And that's really how you can get an idea of what's going on with your hearing.
Yeah.
So those are cool things to look at.
Now a lot of your personal devices are warning you or letting you know too about the volume. And I know the Apple stuff will let you know, like over time too. Like it's let me know that, hey, you've on average all year long, you're listening to stuff about 2 decibels louder, which in the short term may not mean anything, but you see this trend of 2 decibels louder for 5 years. You're like, oh boy.
Yeah.
Better get this together.
I mean, and think about where you are with that, right? Like, so at 75 decibels, I mean, we're talking about, think about the noise of like a regular vacuum cleaner there, an average rate. Once you knock it up to about 80, 85 decibels, it's not that much higher. You're talking about a noisy restaurant, possibly heavy traffic and stuff like that. You're listening to loud music. I mean, I know I'm prone to this when I'm working out.
Yeah.
With a headset, loud music, and I want to cancel out all the noise in the gym, or it's too much. It can damage your ears. Absolutely. So you really want to be cognizant of the issue here. And a lot of people aren't. And the other thing I'm a big proponent of now with my patients, especially since we've been doing these podcasts, get your eyes checked, get your ears checked, just the same as you would get your teeth checked. I mean, it's like, most people go to the dentist, but they don't get their eyes or ears checked, and if I had to pick among 2 of the more important ones of the 3, I'd rather lose my teeth than my hearing or my eyesight, so that's why I just tell people like, that's important to get those checked periodically.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything else, Keoni?
No, I think that's that. I think that's it.
All right. Hopefully you listen to this podcast nice and low, and we will talk with you next week. Until then, be well.
Take care, everybody.